Seishan. Hey! Hey! Seishan. I was saying to Sensei on the way down here, not a kata I've ever really warmed to. It didn't tickle me pickle, if I'm honest. But I've done a lot of research for this one, and the more research I've done, the more I've come to appreciate the kata and its uses. And I was saying to Sensei on the way down here that I set myself a project for each year to pursue, and this is now on my short list of things to do for 2024. So I've gone from not being too fussed about it to actually I'm thinking of throwing a year at it. And I'll try and go into detail of what has caused those changes. A difficult kata to get a grip on. Nobody seems to agree on anything, or very little that they agree on. So we'll have a look and go through the history of the kata like we normally do. And then the key components, what I think you should maybe be paying attention to when you do this kata. And the first one is ibuki, which is the breathing. It's a sister kata to Sanshin, the Goju-ryu kata. And they specifically do Sanshin for breathing. And I think if you paid attention to your breathing, certainly in the first sections of Seishan, then that would stand you in really good stead. And when we do the more in depth, I'll go into that. Second key point is a couple of concepts of Same and Tame. And these are mindsets and attitudes in physical combat. And again, the very early section of the kata, I think there will be fantastic ways of practicing this and developing these mindsets and attributes. And the final one is Shimei. And again, this is, if you've seen the Goju-ryu practitioners doing Sanshin, then you'll have seen where they're physically striking each other, but they're also checking what muscles are being used. And again, I think if you pay attention to this, this will be extremely important and one of the big things that you can get from this kata. So we'll have a look at these concepts in a little more detail. The history of the kata, there's a lot of disagreement, but the only thing that seems to be agreed upon is this is an old Chinese kung fu kata. And it seems that sometime in the past, during a period of turmoil, the southern Shaolin temple was burnt to the ground. And some of the monks fled and took refuge in the shop that made the incense, the aromatic, fragrant stuff that's burnt in temples. They took refuge in the shop that made the incense for them. And eventually they started teaching martial arts. If they'd called it Shaolin monk boxing, that would have probably been a bit of giveaway where they were and what they were doing. So they called it incense shop boxing. And it seems pretty certain that Seishan or Seisan came from this style of Kung Fu. There's going to be a lot of stuff. It'll be easier if I point you to a video link in the description box. And there's a more fuller history in a video in there, which we'll put in so you can go and do further research yourself. But it seems a lot of Okinawans went to China to learn martial arts, and some of them learned this kata, seisan, from incense shop boxing. That's about as much agreement as you're going to get on the subject. We now get on to who was the Okinawans who learnt the kata. So the first one in the frame is our old friend Matsumura. We've met Matsumura in Koshanku, Chinto, Naihanchi. He's also accredited with going to China, learning this kata, bringing it back to Okinawa. Another Okinawan master in the frame is Kanbun Uechi, the founder of the Uechi-Ryu style of karate. He's also allegedly went to China and spent a lot of time training in Chinese martial arts. And originally his style was called Pangai Noon, which is a more sort of Chinese version. And it was only later changed to Uechi-Ryu. But he's also accredited with bringing the style back. And then finally, a sensei who I'd never heard mentioned at all, but seems very influential in Okinawa, and his name is Seisho Aragaki, to the point where in 1867 the Okinawans crowned a new king. The Chinese sent a delegation to welcome the new king, and part of the festivities and entertainments was a display of Okinawan martial arts. And it was Aragaki who was chosen to perform karate, and he actually performed Seisan kata. So he must have been held in quite high esteem because Matsumura and Tosu, who created the Pinan katas, were also teaching at this time. So he was chosen above them. Many of the famous names in the world of karate were taught by Aragaki. Gichin Funakoshi, who created Shotokan, Kenwa Mabuni, who created Shito-Ryu, Choja Miyagi, who created Goju-Ryu. These are all students at one time or another of Aragaki. So he's also credited with bringing the kata back. So we've got three different people who potentially bought the kata. There are a multitude of different versions of the kata. With Naihanchi, with Koshanku, they're all recognisable. There's just slight variations in the techniques. Seishan, no conformity whatsoever. Again, we'll put a link to a video. Two Shorin-Ryu masters and a Goju-Ryu master standing side by side performing Seishan. The two Shorin-Ryu guys do two totally different katas, both called Seishan. Nobody even agrees on what foot to go forward on. Shotokan, Wado and Isshin-Ryu go forward on the left. Everybody else goes forward on the right. I had a look and found Aragaki Seishan, and they go back on the right, so you end up left foot forward. Who knows? It seems to have been changed so much. It's become whatever anybody wants to call Seishan. But I think there are some sort of key components to all the different versions that we can look at in a little bit. And even the name. It seems that Sei is the Chinese name for 10, and San, like in Japanese, is 3. So 10, 3, 13. In Chinese culture, 13 is a lucky number. In the West, it's an unlucky number. Funakoshi changed the name to make it sound more Japanese, and he changed it to Hangetsu, which means half moon, and that sort of relates to the circular foot movements. But there are also 13 lunar months in the year. There's 12 calendar months, but 13 lunar months. So that would tie in with the Hangetsu. But the name seems to be any permutation you like of 13 techniques, or 13 steps, or 13 levels of energy. Nobody seems to agree. It's also possibly that it's 10 techniques repeated 3 times, 10-3. And a lot of the sections of the kata involve doing things 3 times. So again, nobody even agrees on the name. And as for the left and right, I think the logic seems to be people are predominantly right-handed. So if you start on the left, you're going to end up doing your weak side twice, rather than starting on the right and doing your dominant side twice. Why people choose to go forward on the right? Maybe they're taking the heart away. Maybe it's the old adage, put your best foot forward. I don't know. But there seems to be a logic of the left side. And I suppose Aragaki, if he steps back on the left, so he steps back on the right, so you end up on the left. Maybe he was covering all the bases. But so there's no sort of fixed narrative, no fixed story of the history of this kata. But everybody seems to agree it's very old and one of the oldest katas in the karate catalogue. So it's got some history to it, it's just become fragmented.